Did I miss any information? Mr. Weaver?
Yeah, I think it's fair that we have a financial impact statement to discuss, both reflecting positive impacts, as Councilman Davis has mentioned, and the possible negative impacts we've talked about, and then trying to operate in the ambiguity of no definition of sealed corridor. I think that may end up being another large issue of discussion. At the minimum, it has to be a 6-foot chain link fence continuous for the entire stretch.
Well, and thank you, Councilmember, for raising that issue. With respect to trespass prevention, there is not clear guidance with respect to how that is treated along the corridor. We know we have pre-existing issues with respect to trespassing. Particularly, they've been noted in communities like Jupiter, West Palm Beach, and Lake Worth, where you can see the cow pads walking to the point where the tracks cross. The FRA, we had a chance to meet with FRA staff on this very issue during the diagnostic field reviews. The FRA has funding available both to evaluate the extent of illegal trespassing and mitigate illegal trespassing. It has been viewed by some as a double-edged sword because we're not used to seeing a fence along that corridor today, and it would require some type of fencing or barrier, which could be landscape materials. Bougainvillea was suggested as a landscape material that could be planted along the edge to prevent illegal trespassing. That might be visually more appealing than fencing. And so we're in discussion with the FRA on that opportunity. It's been raised as an issue outside of the All Over Florida project. It's been raised as an issue ongoing. And so we're in dialogue with them to explore how we can avail ourselves of those resources to understand the problem and mitigate it. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
You mentioned that there's been no studies done to quantify the negative impacts on property values. And the environmental impact statements, nor the financial impact statements, address the obvious determining factor of residential redevelopment and residential property values along the corridor. How can we move forward without having that fairly substantial piece of data to be considered?
That's why it's raised as an issue, Councilman. We don't know what's in the environmental impact statement yet because it hasn't been published. But this is an issue that's been raised in a number of occasions with the public and local governments. And so the recommendation is to be sure the environmental impact statement addresses that very issue.
So the draft one we have doesn't contain any of this information?
We don't have a draft environmental impact statement.
Okay.
This is a laundry list of everything we've heard in doing all the public outreach we've done. And so the recommendation is to ask the FRA to be sure you address these things before you issue the draft EIS. Here's what we're hearing as a regional planning council and talking to local governments and others through the region. So Federal Railroad Administration, we want you to be sure you address these things. That's the recommendation to council.
I did have 2 more hands, but I want to see if those are still there or was going to be going on with your ideas. Mr. Governor, Mr. Weaver, brief, please.
Every time you sidetrack the freight train, when it takes some time to get back up to speed, it's going to block our local crossings for an extended period of time. It just takes longer.
Where are we sidetracking?
If you need to sidetrack the train, and then
that's what I said. I don't believe that's true.
Well, even if it's not blocking the crossing when it stops, when it recommences, it's starting from 0 miles an hour. All the energy and everything is expended getting back up to speed, so that the freight train crossing is going to take longer. That's one. And is my analysis correct in a 200-mile run from Miami to Cocoa that these freight trains could be sidetracked 4 times?
That's not correct. That's where I told them that information of sidetracking freight trains, that's not, in any of the models we have, it doesn't have that happen because with double tracking the corridor, there's no need for that. There are places where there's switching happening. That's a freight thing that's happening today. And that's where that third switching here, like the Riviera Beach is an example.
Even though the trains are on both directions, you're not going to be sidetracking freight trains?
Because you're thinking of volume of trains. We have a model, an RTC model that actually has that. And it has trains moving all the time. It doesn't have trains waiting for other ones. That's what happens a lot of times on the South Florida corridor, and that's because they're not equipped with the enough infrastructure. We don't have that issue. I'll be happy to get with you and we can show you how we get along. I just don't want to be more.
Last comment then. I'm here partially because I'm a property rights advocate, but on this one occasion, I'd like to point out that the municipalities should become familiar with what limitations that FEC has on their bundled property rights. It's kind of an uneven playing field right now, even though their spirit of cooperation needs to be maintained. Any property rights that FEC has do have limits on them, and when they start impacting your public safety and noise and appearance, there are some limitations the municipality should be familiar with.
Okay, other comments, Mr. Weaver?
Chairman, I respectfully point out that several members brought up some negative impact concerns that they'd like to see brought forward, as well as the financial impact. I'm certain that was stated by more than one person, which would have made it into your list of 6.
Remind me that again.
Your abbreviated 6 items that include positive impact analysis.
Right.
But there has been discussion about both positive and negative impacts and financial impacts. So I'd like to maybe expand what you said and see if the motion maker would be interested in having a more balanced discussion.